Hello, and thank you for joining us on this webinar. My name is David, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Shane O'Hare, Shane's Common Ground's Head of Digital, and also joined by Jamie Adams, one of Common Ground's content coordinators. Shane's got a really detailed presentation for you, and he's going to be covering how Common Ground took a client in a really competitive niche from being virtually invisible on Google to ranking in the top 3 for one of its most important search terms, all within just 6 months. We've got some time at the end of the webinar to run through any questions that you may have. And with Shane and Jamie being on the call, it's a great opportunity for you to pick the brains of a couple of people who they live and breathe all things digital marketing every single day. So if you do have any questions as we go through the presentation, feel free to type them into the Q&A section, which should be visible at the bottom of your screen. Just a reminder, in case you didn't hear the announcement, the webinar is being recorded, and we will send you a link to watch the recording and download a copy of the slide deck after the talk today. So Shane, I know you've got a ton to cover, so I'll hand over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, David. And thanks for everyone who's joined the webinar today, or perhaps you're watching it after on the recording. Really hope you get as much value out of this as I intend. I mean, David's teed it up quite nicely, but essentially what we're going to go through is a bit of a case study for one of our bigger clients over the last 6 months, and essentially what the results we got. So it was a new website, new brand, and first 6 months of the SEO campaign. And as the sort of title implies, we've had some pretty good results. So we've managed to rank them in the top 3 positions for their main keyword, which is not an easy task to do within 6 months, certainly for a new website. So I'm going to take you through a case study in as far as the approach that we took with the client, and I'm hoping most, if not all of it, is sort of stuff that you guys can take away and apply to your own SEO campaigns as well. I won't sort of mention who the client is or their sort of particular market for obvious reasons, but I will go through exactly the approach we took, essentially. So in the interest of time, I'll just jump straight in. So what I'm going to cover, a really quick introduction to myself, why we chose this particular campaign to do a case study for, a quick snapshot of the brief. So what was the client asking us to do? The strategy that we put in place, which is really what the bulk of this webinar will cover. So how we plan to meet that brief essentially for the organic campaign. A quick view of implementation. So based on the strategy, how did we implement it over the 6 months? What did we do? When did we do it? I'll take you through a quick snapshot of results. So what happened to their visibility? How many keywords were they ranking for? Where were they ranking for them? The impact on traffic. So over the first 6 months, and the kind of value of that traffic as well, just to sort of highlight that it's not vanity traffic. I'll then jump into some key learnings. So what were the things that we thought really moved the dial for this particular campaign, and what are the things that you guys can take away and apply to your own SEO campaigns. And then, as David said, there'll be some time at the end for a Q&A. I'll aim for about 10-15 minutes, but if we need to go over, I'm happy to do so. So I'll just jump straight in. So who am I and why should you listen? So I'm Shane, I'm Head of Digital at Common Ground. I've been working at Common Ground for about 5 years now, working with them for 5 years. And my role here essentially is for our full client set to oversee client strategy, client delivery, and client performance. So making sure we have the right plan in place for all of our clients, making sure we're implementing that plan on a sort of monthly basis, and then making sure we're getting the results that we should be getting. I've been working in digital for over 10 years now, which makes me feel really old. I've spent the last sort of 5 years or so working on the agency side, and prior to that, I was working in-house. I worked with a few sort of leading comparison sites, Money Supermarket, UK Power, Make It Cheaper, did a bit of work with Uswitch as well. So I've kind of seen both sides of the aisle, if you will, and I think during those sort of 10 years, I've probably worked on hundreds of different marketing campaigns across a wide variety of markets and niches. And over the last 12 months, very proud to say that sort of well over 90% of our client targets have been achieved. And as an added bonus, as David mentioned, we've got Jamie on the call. So Jamie is our content coordinator. So he essentially looks after the content machine at Common Ground, if you will. So sort of making sure that all of the content that we produce is kind of best in class, and it's sort of set to be produced as intended. But Jamie's also got a really good eye for content strategy and what types of content work, and he played a really, really pivotal role in this particular campaign that we're discussing today. So Jamie's going to be available throughout to answer any questions, mostly on the content side of things, and he'll also be available at the end for the Q&A as well. So why did we choose this project for a case study? Now, the kind of title of the webinar kind of gives it away. We've seen really good results in a short period of time, and ultimately that is the reason why we chose this particular project for a case study. I think anyone who works in SEO or anyone who's had any involvement in SEO will probably know that it's not a sort of quick fix activity. It's a longer term investment. You invest today, and generally you start to see results from sort of month 6 onwards. Sometimes it can be a bit shorter, sometimes it's a bit longer, but generally it takes about 6 months to start to see any meaningful growth over time. But that's not what happened in this case. We got growth much quicker than we usually would have, and then we consider the fact that it's the head term, it's the main keyword that we've ranked really well for, and the fact that it's a new website. It's just super impressive from a sort of speed of results perspective. A couple of other reasons. So sort of due to the small period of time, relatively small period of time, 6 months, and the site being brand new, we're able to sort of assign some key learnings to specific activities in a much better way than you normally would. So people watching this who have been sort of running their own SEO campaigns for maybe a couple of years, you'll know that if traffic starts to increase or decrease, it can be quite challenging to pinpoint that performance change to a particular activity because there's so many variables in SEO. But in this case, it was a small period of time and we were starting from scratch. So we were able to do a much better job of sort of working out exactly what has moved the dial. And I hope that's where you'll get some value from this webinar as well. The other point is that we've had to establish what is a startup business as a key market player in a really, really short space of time and set them up for future growth. Now, there's not much that you guys can take away from that, but it's something we're incredibly proud of. So naturally, we wanted to do a quick case study based on that reason. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly for everyone watching, the approach that we took with this client can be applied to almost any other website to drive rapid organic growth. We haven't reinvented the wheel here. We haven't done anything that we don't normally do. It's the same approach that we take with all of our clients. There are a couple of tweaks here and there, which I think have helped, which I'll go into. But ultimately, the approach we've taken, anyone watching this can take away and do themselves if they have the time and resource to do it. And then finally, there's one other reason why we wanted to do a case study on this, and it's because we managed to avoid the Google sandbox. And many of you watching this might be wondering what on earth is a Google sandbox. Essentially, it's an assumption that there's something built into the Google algorithm, which essentially says for any new website, it's not going to rank competitively for the first 6 months, certainly not for big commercial keywords. You'll rank for some smaller keywords, some long tail keywords, obviously your brand keywords, but generally for the first 6 months or so, you're not going to drive high volumes of traffic because you're not going to be ranking for those big terms. It's a sort of tried and tested theory. It's certainly been around for as long as I've been working in SEO, so sort of 10 or so years. And if you've ever started doing SEO for a new website, you've probably witnessed this yourself. And this graph here just kind of illustrates typically how that sandbox phase can look. So sort of months 1 to 6, a little bit of growth, but not nothing to sort of write home about. And then after you get out of that sandbox period, after 6 months, that's when you start to see the real growth, assuming that you've done everything correctly. And it's a theory that I think most people in SEO sort of believe in and understand because it kind of makes sense from Google's point of view. They don't want brand new websites popping up first, second place in Google if they're not going to deliver that user experience. So it makes much more sense for Google just to drip feed traffic into those new sites, see how it performs, see whether they're able to answer the user's question, and then sort of determine where it should land after the sandbox phase. So I think looking at performance, we got out of the sandbox around month 3, month 4, which to me is it's a clear indication that Google trusts the site. It's seen traffic go into it. It knows that traffic's performing well. We've got really high engagement on the site as well, quality content, etc. So we're able to get out of that sandbox phase earlier, which is obviously incredibly useful if you are starting from scratch with a new website. It's one of the reasons why a lot of people in it who work in SEO kind of give up and they don't see results for 6 months and they think this isn't working and I'll try something else. But in reality, it's just because they're in that sandbox phase. So it was really interesting to see that we got out of it. It's not something we see very often. So just another final reason why we wanted to do the case study. And I thought it'd be good to just have our first poll at this point. So there's going to be 3 throughout the webinar. And this first one is just a quick question for your own organic campaigns, whether you're kind of running it at the moment or you've run it previously. How long did it take you to reach page 1 for your main keyword? And I think, David, you just activated the poll.
Yeah, I've just activated the poll. Thank you for that. I think whilst we're waiting for a few people to answer, it's probably a good opportunity, Jamie, if you unmute yourself, just to bring you in and maybe share some of your views or what you're expecting people to see, and then I can share the results.
Yeah, sorry, and let me just grab up the poll. Yeah, so when you're looking at something like this, the one thing you have to remember when you're looking at SEO is that it is not a quick fix. There seems to be a lot of information out there that does say SEO can be a quick fix, but what we've seen here is actually, I suppose, Shane, you can be more testament to this, but I'm expecting a lot of people to see, probably say 18 plus months, but maybe that's my naivety from being in the industry so long. Maybe some people think it is a quick fix. So for me, depends on your experience with SEO. If you're very, very, very new to it, you're probably going to say less than 6 months or maybe 6 to 18. But if you are maybe even just dipped your toe in the industry, you might be more familiar, and you're probably going to see some 18 plus. So for me, I'm going to stick in the middle and say 6 to 18 months might be the one we see here most prominently.
A pretty fair guess there. So I'll end the poll and share the results with everybody, and you can see hopefully that yeah, there you go. So most people actually are saying they're still not there yet, and I guess that's the thing with SEO, is it is often an ongoing battle. Relatively few people, so only 15% are getting the results that they're putting them on page 1 in less than 6 months. So I think it sheds some light and yeah, really showcases how incredible the achievements are for this case study. So I'll stop sharing. Thanks everyone for taking part in this poll, and as Shane said, we've got a couple more later on just to keep you on your toes.
Sounds good. Cool. So I'll just jump on to the next slide. First place I wanted to start was with the brief. So just to give you a quick overview of what was expected of us and kind of where we needed to build the strategy from. As I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the client themselves for obvious reasons, but the kind of broad market that they operate in is car rentals / car leasing. Their target audience is B2C. They don't do B2B at the moment. And ultimately, the objective was to produce and then implement an SEO strategy which can take the site from brand new, from launch, right the way up to over 75,000 organic sessions and over 3,500 conversions in just 12 months. An incredibly ambitious objective, but it's certainly something that we can deliver and are on track to deliver. I've just dropped some of these key challenges that were kind of immediately obvious to us on receipt of this brief. So the first one, as I've mentioned a couple of times, it's a new brand, so there'll be no brand traffic. People won't be aware of who this particular client is, which is obviously a bit of a kind of uphill battle. The website is brand new as well, and it was kind of in a good enough state, and that's not uncommon for startups. They tend to launch a website as a kind of minimal viable product, something that works just as we need it to work, but it won't have all the sort of bells and whistles and niceties that you might want from an SEO point of view. Similarly, we had limited development resource, again, not uncommon for startups. The first sort of 12 months or so, that development queue is going to be full of sort of projects for the product or the service or processes or systems. And if you're kind of on the SEO side of things, asking for a nice blog layout, for example, chances are you're going to be fairly bottom of the queue. The other thing was difficulty in identifying seasonality, and this may be a problem that many people watching this have come across, certainly over the last couple of years. I mean, you think back over the last year or 18 months, with the economy as it is, that's definitely had an impact on sort of user behavior and how people search and when they search for certain things. Then obviously prior to that, we had COVID for a couple of years, and it's essentially turned the world on its head, and things haven't quite gone back to how they were sort of pre-COVID as well. So when you're in a position at the moment and you're trying to look back over the last sort of 3 or 4 years to try and understand what those seasonality sort of trends are, it's more difficult than ever to do it, essentially. It might not be the same for every market, but it certainly has been for most of the markets that I've worked in. And then finally, it's an incredibly competitive market. Car rental / car leasing. It's not a new concept. It's been here for some time. And then obviously when you're starting from scratch, you're competing against websites which have been going for sort of 3, 4, 5+ years. In that time, they've built up a tremendous amount of authority, trust, and essentially you're in a position where you need to try and close that gap as quickly as you can. So you essentially need to be doing more or working smarter than the competitor set is in order to close that gap, which is no easy feat. So onto the strategy. So what did we think we had to do in order to hit those targets laid out in the brief, and how did we go about doing it? So first of all, I just want to give you a really quick overview of the sort of main elements of the strategy that we covered. Obviously, there's a couple of bits in here which I haven't added in just in the interest of time, but these sort of 6 or 7 elements, the kind of fundamentals, the things that we had to do, and the things that actually had the most impact on performance over the last 6 months. So you've got discovery, understanding the business, the goals, and everything else. Competitor review, really, really important generally, but more so when you're starting from scratch and you're kind of in a position where you have to build a website. Search market analysis, so things like keyword research, identifying the audience and the sort of sub-audiences, mapping that keyword research to the funnel. So is someone ready to buy now? Are they in the research phase? Are they even higher than that? Are we just trying to sort of generate some brand awareness? And intent mapping as well. So based on the keywords we've identified, what do we think the search is actually looking for? And then finally, seasonality, not just in general or broad, but across the different content areas. I'll then jump into how we approach the strategy from a content perspective, a link perspective, and a technical perspective. Generally speaking, these are the 3 sort of core areas of SEO, and you need to be delivering across these 3 areas in order to compete. And then I'll then just summarize in terms of what our strategic priorities were for the year ahead. What were the sort of fundamental areas of the strategy that we absolutely needed to hit in order to achieve those numbers? So first one, as I mentioned, is discovery. So ultimately, in order to sort of craft an SEO strategy, we needed to understand the business and everything about them. So their brand, their goals, and extract as much information out of these people as possible. We needed to understand it inside out. From an agency point of view, there's obviously more need to do that versus someone working in-house. And I imagine most people on this webinar are probably working in-house. But it's still a phase that I would recommend absolutely focusing on if you are in-house. Because a key reason for SEO campaigns not working or not delivering the results as intended is that they can sometimes be created in isolation from the sort of wider business strategy. Now, if you're working in-house, I see the mistake quite often. Someone will start with the SEO strategy, they'll base it on what they're seeing from a keyword research point of view, and they'll move straight into implementation without actually considering what the business strategy is or what the business goals are. And then from an insight point of view, again, from agency side, when a client joins us, we don't know anything about them, so we need to learn as much as we can. From an in-house side, chances are if you're working with a business, you know who the business is, you know who the audience is, you know what the goals are, but there's still a lot of value to be gained from sort of gathering insights. So when I used to work in-house and I was putting an SEO strategy together, either sort of for a site as a whole or for an individual campaign or project, one of the first things I do is reach out to the customer service team, the sales team, and try and get some insight from them that could help inform the strategy. So the customer service team, they can really run you through the pain points of the customers at the moment. And that's insight that you won't necessarily get from a keyword research tool or a keyword research task. Similarly, with the sales team, I'd want to know, of the leads which convert, why do they convert? What is it about us that makes someone buy with us? And on the flip side, for the leads which don't convert, why is that? Are our customers going to, or our potential customers going to a particular competitor? Is there a particular reason they're not buying with us in the first place? It's incredibly valuable information, and it can absolutely play a fundamental part within the SEO strategy going forward. So it doesn't matter whether you're agency side or in-house, the discovery phase is absolutely something you should do. And it was, for this particular campaign that we're doing the case study for, it was invaluable. The next step is competitor research. So again, as the sort of meme suggests, I personally think it's kind of a big deal. In most SEO campaigns I do, this is one of the initial tasks that I carry out. And again, it's absolutely crucial in trying to build that strategy, especially if you're starting from scratch, either with a new website or with an existing website, but you're doing SEO for the first time. It can save you a ton of time on strategy and planning and research and everything else. Because if you're kind of just entering the market with a new website or just starting SEO for the first time, chances are you've got sort of at least 5 to 10 competitors who have been doing this for a long time. They've been producing content, they've been building links, they've been testing things like UX and CRO. There's a ton of insight based on years and years of these competitors existing that you can simply extract if you know what to look for, where to look for it, and how to look for it, essentially. Now, generally, there's sort of a dozen or so things that we tend to look at when it comes to competitor research, but I've just dropped in sort of 9 or 10 of them here, which certainly in this case helped us from the strategy side of things. So the first one is, how are their sites structured? So in this case, for this particular client, we were in month 1, we were in the stage where we were supporting the build of the website from an SEO point of view. So how does the website need to be structured? How do the main categories, subcategories work? Where do we build in the landing pages? How do the resources work? And how do we sort of structure the blog element of the site? Really, really key questions where you don't really want to get it wrong at the start, because you'll be building on shaky ground. So really important question to look at. The next one was, which content areas are they prioritizing? Now, for obvious reasons, this is a really good bit of insight. When we came to do this research, we immediately spotted some particular topics and some particular category and landing page topics, which seemed to be a priority for most, if not all, of the competitors that we looked at. Now, that's an immediate signal that these pages should be a priority for us. Now, you don't just want to look at the competitors and copy what they're doing for obvious reasons, but it can give you a real steer in terms of how to prioritize certain content areas, and it did in this case, and it definitely gave us a bit of a head start. Similarly, how were they positioned from a link point of view? So when I say links, I mean third-party websites linking in. I'm sure most of you are aware, but essentially links are a really big signal for SEO. Generally speaking, the more links you have pointing in and the higher the quality of those links, the more impact they'll have on your visibility overall. Now, as part of the SEO strategy, we do a full link audit of our competitors, where we get really, really under the skin and understand where the links are coming from, where they're pointing to, how relevant the sites are, which are linking to the site itself, etc. For the purpose of this competitive research task, we take a bit more of a high-level view, and what we're ultimately trying to understand is how bigger impact are links having based on this client's performance. Are they playing a big part? Are they playing a small part? And it can just give you a bit of a steer in terms of why this client is performing as they are during the research phase. The next thing we tend to ask is, how are they positioned from a technical perspective? Now, there's less you can take from this one, but there are some crucial elements that we tend to look at. One of the main ones is page load speed performance. So generally speaking, if you find that the majority of competitors are all passing Google's Core Web Vitals test, which essentially is a test which measures how quickly and how efficiently a web page loads. If all of the competitors are passing that test, then it's pretty much essential that we need to pass it as well. Otherwise, that's one key area where we're going to be behind. And on the flip side, if most of the competitors aren't passing it, then there's obviously a potential competitive advantage there if we can tick that box where most competitors aren't. Next one we look at is, how do they talk about the product? This is useful for people like Jamie, who focus on the content side of the business and give you real good bits of insight in terms of how to kind of answer a question and then push that user towards a conversion, and sort of angles on how to talk about the product or service. Really useful thing to look at. Which audiences do they appear to target? So again, trying to identify those audiences within the strategy is a task that needs to be done. So if we can gather any insights from competitors, we should certainly do it. Just going to have a look at time quickly. How are they using paid channels? So absolutely vital. Are there any paid keywords which are standing out? We've got tools where we can essentially drop a website in and it will tell you which keywords they're bidding on and generally how much they're paying for those keywords and that paid traffic. And it's a really good indication as to what the commercial keywords are for a particular website. How they're performing organically, and I don't just mean on the whole, I mean month on month, how are they performing? Breaking the site down, which is something we do. How are their commercial landing pages performing? How are they performing on a category level? How do their resources perform? And crucially, for this particular example, how did they perform during their first 6 months? How long did it take them to hit those numbers? How quickly did they get out of the sandbox, etc., etc.? So there's a lot to be learned by doing a bit of performance analysis against the competitor set. And then finally, what are the common themes across the competitor set? So running through that set of questions, what are the common themes? If there are any particular content areas which most seem to be prioritizing, any paid keywords, any particular audiences, chances are it should be a priority for us as well. So it can take time. It is a manual process. There isn't really a tool that just kind of does it for you. You do need a bit of sort of nous and common sense, but it absolutely pays dividends in terms of informing the strategy and also saving time in terms of kind of starting from scratch on these various things. And that leads us neatly into our next poll. So for your own organic campaigns, have you carried out any in-depth competitor analysis over the last, say, 12 months or so?
Okay, so you should all see that poll on your screen now. If you can all just jot your answers in. Jamie, seeing as you did so well last time, give you another pop at it as well.
In terms of organic, I would have to. I'm going to give a very tentative yes. I'm hoping to see yes on everyone, because if you haven't, you might have a little bit of homework to do after this webinar is finished. There's obviously so many tools out there that make competitor analysis much easier these days, such as SEMrush, RFs are built with. If you are building a product, you basically, as Shane has just demonstrated very thoroughly, you do need competitor analysis. It's absolutely pivotal, and what you need to understand from that is how you can improve on what your best competitor is doing. And if you truly believe in your product, which you do because you built it or service, then that's something you should be able to answer. And this is just basically the tools you need to be able to identify how you answer that question. So very much hoping for a big yes here. And if it is a no, then I hope it's I'm starting tomorrow. Oh.
There you go. It's a bit more evenly balanced, but it is still the majority of people are saying no, unfortunately. So a bit of work for people to do.
Cool.
Thank you.
Carry on. So the next element of the strategy, and potentially the biggest in terms of time required and I guess ultimate value, is the search market analysis element. So this is essentially where we're trying to say, how do people search for the product or service we're offering, both on a kind of ready to buy level, so the kind of bottom of the funnel keywords, informationally, so someone who's maybe in market but they've got a bunch of questions, and then more broadly as well, how do potential customers tend to search within this area. Now the first phase is obviously keyword research. Now I could sit here and talk about keyword research for hours and hours, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to give quite a high level overview in terms of the way that we approach it, both for this particular campaign and in general. So essentially there's 3 keyword research tasks that we do, which I've highlighted here in blue. The first one is keyword research for existing pages. So if you are an established website, chances are most of your priority pages are ranking for some keywords. So the first step for us is always trying to understand, A, which keywords are our pages ranking for, and then B, are these the right keywords that we should be targeting? And 9 times out of 10, as you can imagine, it's no. So we have to go through and work out which keywords we should actually be targeting for our existing pages. So what is the primary keyword, and then what are the secondary keywords, which can be anything from sort of a handful to a couple of dozen. Once we've got that, the sort of primary and secondary keyword list per page, we then go in and look at the top 3 results for those keywords and see which types of content that they are surfacing rather, to rank for those keywords, what kind of length of content it is, what they cover, etc., etc. Essentially, what we're trying to understand is, what does Google want to rank for this keyword? And generally speaking, looking at the top 3 to 5 results, you can get a pretty good idea in terms of the type of content that you'll need to produce in order to rank for a particular keyword. We also look at things like how many links those pages have and a bunch of other variables, but generally it's the type of content that we tend to look at. So that's keyword research for existing pages. We then move on to what we call a gap analysis. Now, this is essentially where we take sort of 5 to 10 organic competitors, and we essentially scrape every single keyword that they rank for and which pages they rank for them on. And where they rank for them as well. We'll then remove from that list any keywords that we rank for already, that we identified during the existing pages keyword research. We'd remove any competitive brand terms, and then finally we'd remove any keywords that we just don't want to rank for. There are always going to be keywords where a competitor ranks for them, we don't, and the reason is we just don't want to. So once you remove any keywords we rank for already, any brand terms from the competitors, and any kind of dud keywords, what you're essentially left with is a list of what we call gap keywords. So keywords that we want to rank for, but we don't at the moment. And that list of keywords will essentially, or should essentially, inform your content strategy going forward. It's those keywords where you'll build content around, whether it's landing pages, whether it's resources, whether it's site information, or whatever it needs to be. So it's a really, really crucial part of the strategy phase. The third keyword research task, which quite often can go overlooked by some people working in SEO, people tend to think that if they look at their existing pages and they look at their competitors, they've pretty much covered as much ground as they need to. But in reality, certainly in my experience, 9 times out of 10, there will be gaps that are left from these first 2 keyword research tasks, which is essentially where you need to go in and do some bespoke research. So if there are any topics that weren't really covered during these phases that might be quite obvious or might actually not be obvious, and you just need to do a bit more homework, these are the ones that will be picked up in this bespoke keyword research task, just to close the gap between anything lost on these first 2. And ultimately, what the output of this is a view of the addressable search market. So you've done the keyword research, you've cleaned it up, you've now got a view of the number of keywords you can target, how many times those keywords get searched for a month or a year, hopefully the seasonality of those keywords over time, and it essentially gives you a picture of your target audience or your potential. And then the sort of next task can be, well, how much of this market do I think I can penetrate? If these keywords generate 1 million searches a month, you think you can get 5% of that market, you'd be aiming for, what, 50,000 users per month from an organic point of view, just as a really high level example. A couple of important things to consider with keyword research that were sort of crucial for this campaign that we're talking about, but also in general. First one is keyword intent. So trying to really understand what the intent is behind that keyword. I guess just to give an example, if someone's searching for car leasing, one person searching for that might be ready to buy right now. They've done their research, they're searching for car leasing, they're hoping to see a list of car leasing websites where they can choose a car and go ahead. On the flip side, someone might be searching that keyword for the very first time and they're just starting to dip their toe into it, they're just starting to research it. It may not be something that they go ahead with, but they're much earlier on in the buying cycle. For keywords like that, which can have mixed intent, I would always err on the side of caution. And if you think it could be a commercial keyword or an informational, I generally go for informational, just to sort of err on the side of caution. The next thing is SERP intent. So trying to understand, as I kind of alluded to earlier, which types of content do we think Google want to rank for this particular keyword? One mistake that we see quite often is a client might have a keyword, let's say you're a desk e-commerce website, for example. And you may be targeting a keyword like, what size desk do I need for my office? Now, there's obviously a couple of different types of content you could produce to target that keyword. It could be an FAQ on a landing page or a product page. It could be a resource guide, which is a bit more in depth. If you're ever in that situation, what we 9 times out of 10 recommend is going onto Google, searching for that keyword and seeing what is shown. It may be a mix, in which case you might have to just take an educated guess. But in the majority of cases, there'll be a consistent content type which is ranking for any given keyword. The next thing is keyword difficulty and rankability. So if you've used SEO tools in the past, you'll know that whenever you're doing keyword research, every keyword has its keyword difficulty score. It's a score of 0 to 100. The higher it is, the more difficult it is to rank. I take that with a pinch of salt because they're not always accurate. Sometimes you'll have a keyword with a low keyword difficulty score, but then when you search for that keyword, you've got like government websites or the BBC ranking in the sort of top positions, and chances are you've got no chance about ranking those as well. So really, really important thing to consider. Next one is cost per click. So if you were to pay for this keyword from a sort of PPC perspective, how much would it cost you for each click? And it's obviously a really good indication in terms of the commercial value of that keyword. The cost per click is determined by how much people essentially are willing to pay for that keyword over time. So it's really, really insightful data, and it should definitely be a consideration in the keyword research tasks. Just to go through the last 3 quite quickly. So search volumes are rough estimates, and this is something that we really found to be true with this particular campaign. So some search volumes for some keywords were massively overestimated, some were massively underestimated, and the seasonality varied quite wildly between some of them. So we had to kind of pivot and adjust as we sort of went through the first couple of months. Second to last one is don't ignore low volume terms. Again, quite a common mistake. People will see a keyword appears to drive 10 searches a month. Whereas if you start to rank for that keyword and you use a tool like Google Search Console, you'll actually see how many searches it generates if you're on page 1 in the form of impressions. So definitely don't ignore the low volume terms, certainly if you're early on with your SEO campaign. And then also keep an eye out for trending and declining keywords as well. So again, looking at seasonality, you don't want to be putting all your eggs into one basket in terms of a keyword if it's actually sort of declining over time. And on the flip side, try to spot keywords which are sort of beginning to trend as well, because chances are they might continue to move in that direction. Next thing we did was what I call funnel and intent mapping. So for all of the keyword research that we've done, we need to assign it to a particular stage of the funnel. You need to speak to people in different ways depending on where they are in the funnel, whether they're kind of right at the bottom, ready to buy right now, or right at the top, they're not aware of who you are, might not even be aware of the service that you offer. You need to speak to them in a different way. You need to have a landing page which is positioned to where they are in the journey. So one thing that we do with all of the keywords that we identify as targets is assign a sort of funnel stage, essentially. Now, it's not an exact science. There are keywords which will sit between bottom and middle of funnel. You just have to make an educated guess on it. But it's a really useful thing to have, and it kind of informs the content type and the strategy going forward that you would assign to each keyword. And then similarly with intent mapping as well, so trying to work out what this person is actually looking for with this keyword. Do they want information? Do they want to buy? Do they want to be signposted? Trying to work that out as best as possible is crucial. And it was really a valuable exercise to do during this campaign. And generally it's something we do with all of our clients where we're producing content as well. Next thing we did, and it's not this shouldn't necessarily happen in this order. Some people work on audiences a little earlier on, some a little later, but essentially, as anyone who kind of works in marketing knows, you need to understand the people you're talking to in order to be able to talk to them in the right way. Now, as a startup without any kind of audience data or a customer base, we had to take a bit of a sort of common sense approach to try and identify our target audiences, at least initially. It's something that we developed over time, and we're actually in a much better position with it now on sort of month 7 than we were on month 1. But ultimately, we sort of segmented our audiences in terms of these 3 that I've got here on the left. So those which are ready to buy, these are searching for the obviously commercial keywords, the keywords that cost a lot to bid on from a paid perspective. The next audience group was those who are in market for the product, but perhaps not ready to buy yet. They're looking for information. They're looking to be convinced that the product is what they need, essentially. So I guess just to give an example of that, in this case, a keyword like, can I get out of my car lease early? Someone searching for that is clearly looking to get out of their car lease, and it may be that they're looking for a better deal elsewhere. So we can answer that question with content and position ourselves as a viable alternative. It's very much a worthwhile exercise, and it's an approach that we take across most of our sort of client campaigns, and it does pay dividends because the volume of traffic for these kind of keywords is higher. The competition is generally lower, but there's still that intent to convert eventually. Maybe not right now, but eventually. And the third one was just potential customers. So these were people who sort of fitted the sort of loose demographic of the kinds of people we were targeting, but they're kind of much earlier on in the buying cycle. They may be looking for very, very broad informational terms, and it's just a chance for us to sort of build a bit of brand awareness, get in front of them. If they ever do decide to take up our product or service, they're familiar with who we are. We've answered that question before. We've had that kind of touch point with them. And then just generally speaking, in terms of audience analysis, I just dropped some sort of pointers on the right-hand side here, just in terms of the sort of various tactics that you can use to try and build out the audience in a bit more of a thorough way. So reviewing the customer base, this is something we're doing at the moment, and it's incredibly valuable. We now know where, based on location, how likely someone is to buy, based on things like salary, age, demographics, etc., etc. So we're building that into our strategy, but we didn't have that from the start. You can also do things like auditing your social following, market research, looking at industry data, competitor analysis, as I mentioned, looking at sort of affinity categories. So what is our audience interested in? Demographic data from GA. You obviously need to have that first, and then building out customer personas based on the insight that you have. And then the last thing we looked at was seasonality as part of the search market analysis phase. And my face was very similar to the little girl on the right. It was quite confusing to look at because, as I said, the last 2 or 3 years have been a bit of a whirlwind. Nothing really seems to be the same, certainly not for this market. And it kind of makes sense, especially for the car lease, sort of car rental market with COVID and people working from home, with the sort of impact of the economy turning on a downturn. People are sort of considering choices around their outgoings, and obviously any sort of vehicle cost, whether you own or you lease or you rent, it's quite a considerable cost as well. So we couldn't get too much from seasonality. So we just kind of had to make our best assumptions, both in terms of the last 3 years worth of data. We also looked a bit further back as well, so pre-COVID as well. So we tried to give our best assumptions in terms of where we think traffic was going to go that year. And it's obviously something that we look at on a monthly basis as well. I'd say as a general point, if you are in a position where you are trying to understand seasonality for either for your brand or your market or a particular segment of it, 2 tools that I would tend to use. The first is Google Search Console. So you can segment down by keyword or topic or page a view of the last 16 months in terms of how many searches that particular area drove and how many clicks. It's a free tool. Anyone who works in SEO should have it set up. It's normally my first port of call. The second one is Google AdWords, so their keyword planner. So you can get some pretty accurate data from there in terms of how often a particular keyword is searched for over time. And I think you can go back as far as sort of 5+ years as well. So you can avoid all of the sort of COVID and economy madness. But yeah, if you are looking for seasonality data, Google Search Console and Google Keyword Planner would be where I recommend. So the next step was to jump into the content element of the strategy. Now, for most of our clients, and I imagine for most people watching who are running an SEO campaign, content is normally the kind of one area which takes the most budget, the most focus, and ultimately drives the most results. So from a strategic point of view, it was obviously priority 1 for us. The first thing that we tend to do from a content point of view is try to understand which types of content that we'll need. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we do this by looking at which types of content are ranking for certain keywords. We get this information from the competitor review, and a lot of it is kind of common sense as well. There are certain keywords where you know a landing page is appropriate, or a product category page is appropriate, or a resource page is appropriate. For this particular example, we knew that these core content types that we would need are kind of product service category pages, subcategory pages, and then individual pages for individual product or services. Fairly standard stuff. From a resource side of things, we kind of broke it out into 3 content types. The first was expert guides. So these tend to be kind of longer pieces of content, kind of end-to-end guides on a particular topic in many cases. Blogs, which are kind of geared around a subset of a particular topic. And then FAQs. So this could be a blog where we just focus on answering one particular question, or these could be FAQs which sit on a sort of wider page, essentially. There are some instances where we considered site information pages, and then news pages, I guess, is one way that we thought we could attract sort of trending keywords. So if there's anything happening in the market, we knew that we could create a news page for it. These are obviously sort of shorter term strategies. For example, I think one thing we were looking at was the delay in the delay in cars being delivered through lease agreements. That was a bit of a story this year, and it was obviously something we could jump on from a news point of view. And then the diagram on the right just gives a bit of an indication in terms of the broad types of content that businesses or marketing teams tend to produce, and the kind of SEO priority along those. So the way that I like to think about it is hero, hub, and hygiene. So hero content is your kind of big campaign content, mostly featured around sort of PR. You might run 1 or 2 of these campaigns a year, maybe more. The SEO requirement for this kind of content is quite low. You can give some high-level support, but generally it's not an SEO play. The next one down is hub content. So this is the kind of category content, the evergreen content. It's obviously a priority for SEO, but it's something that you'll do and then monitor over time rather than continually pumping out new categories or evergreen content. And the final one at the bottom is hygiene. So this is the functional content. This will be the stuff that you do around your blog and your expert guides, etc. This will be a kind of ongoing content campaign over time. So producing maybe sort of 5 to 10 different pieces per month. And this will be driven by SEO. The kind of topics that we cover and the traffic that comes to these pages will both be delivered by SEO. So it's a really high priority area for search. The next thing that we look at in the content element is pillar and cluster. So this is essentially where we take up where we left off with the keyword research. So we've done our keyword research for existing pages, the gap keywords, and the bespoke. That's given us a list of target keywords. The next step is to take those keywords and get them into a content plan. Now, what we do as a first port of call is what we call pillar and cluster. You may call it sort of category and subcategory, because that's essentially what it is. It's grouping those keywords into the broad categories and then breaking them down into the subcategories, which would be the clusters. I guess an example of this, if you were I don't know, bathroom retailer, for example, an e-commerce site, and your broad pillars up here might be sort of different rooms, so bathroom or sort of hallway or whatever it is, and the clusters could be sort of product areas, so sort of baths, sinks, etc. And then you'd have content topics which sit underneath each of those clusters. And the idea here is essentially to try and own as many of these content groups as possible. If you sort of taking the example that we are doing for the case study on the topic of car leasing, if you imagine you've got site A and site B, and site A covers the commercial terms and kind of some of the informational terms, but that's it. Whereas site B covers both of those, but it also covers the topic in depth, end to end, so answering every question that someone might have on this particular in this particular market. From Google's perspective, site B covers the topic much more in depth and therefore has more authority to talk about this product and therefore will rank higher for those commercial keywords. So there's the benefit from that perspective, covering the topic from a kind of end-to-end perspective. But obviously, these particular topics, these particular pages will drive traffic and awareness and conversions in their own right as well. So there's kind of two key benefits to taking this approach. Once we've got our keywords grouped in terms of the pillars and the clusters, so the categories and subcategories, the next step for us is to essentially take those groups of keywords and turn them into topics themselves. So the general process for this, I've tried to keep it quite high level in the interest of time. You start with a keyword or a group of keywords. You do the SERP analysis on those keywords, so you see what Google's ranking for them, what types of content it's ranking for them, what the intent seems to be. We then move into the content tactics. So what is the type of content that we need to produce to rank for this keyword or group of keywords? Is it a blog? Is it a landing page, etc.? We then go into what we call framing keywords. So this is where we'll look at the top 5 or 10 results and try and spot some common themes in terms of how the content is structured. And that's what I mean by framing keywords. I'm not talking about SEO keywords, but framing keywords. So generally, what are the main things that are covered across the top 10 competitors who are ranking for this term? And once you've done those sort of 3 or 4 pieces of work, what you essentially have is your identified topic. From there, you can start to put a content brief together, which is something we do as well, but something I haven't covered in here, just in the interest of time. Have that content produced, edited, make sure it's optimized, and then published to the site, and it will begin to drive traffic over time. So that's a quick run through of the approach we took from a content point of view for this client. I'm just going to give a quick overview of what we did from a link perspective. I'm really conscious of time, so I'll talk through this quite quickly. Essentially, from a link building point of view, we knew that as a new website, links would need to play a considerable role in the strategy, as they would with most, but certainly as a new player to the market, we'd need to have links as a priority. So what we did, as I mentioned earlier, we did a really in-depth audit of our competitors to understand the volume and the quality of links and linking root domains that they had. We looked at the velocity of link acquisition, so how many links were they building on average per month. We looked at page-by-page performance. So in many cases, certainly if you're a new website, but even if you're not, you might come up against a competitor who has millions of links, which they've built over decades of the website being alive. Chances are, with all the will in the world, you're not going to catch up with them. So what we would tend to do is say, okay, well, which pages do we want to rank for, and how do they perform from a link perspective on this particular page? Now, a particular website, a particular competitor website can have millions of links, but their core commercial landing pages might only have a few dozen. There's an opportunity there to close that gap and actually catch up on a page-by-page level. So it's really important. We looked at low-hanging fruit opportunities. So essentially, what were of the competitors' links, which did we think we could replicate pretty easily? So this could be links in listicles or aggregator sites where we could essentially reach out and have a pretty high success rate in terms of getting our website linked from there as well. We looked at high value opportunities. So what were the sort of top 10 or 20 links that the competitors had? And what would we need to do to get those links as well, or at least get similar links from them? And by high value, I mean links from very, very authoritative or very, very relevant websites. And then lastly, we looked at trending tactics for earning and building links used by competitors. So were there any common themes in terms of how these competitor sites seem to be building links? Were they doing infographics? Were they creating sort of linkable assets? Did they appear to be doing direct outreach? Whatever it seems to be, just trying to get some insight in terms of what seems to be working in this particular market. And essentially from here, once we've run all that analysis, we've got a pretty good idea in terms of what we can do from a link building point of view, and then what we need to do from a link building point of view. How can we close that gap and where can we close it? And some of the potential tactics we looked at was creating linkable assets. So really, really informative blog posts, which would likely just organically generate links over time. Tactical link acquisition, so identifying sites where we thought we had a high chance of success if we reached out to them and essentially asked for a link to a particular page for a particular reason. There's a couple of aggregator sites in this market, so it was an obvious tactic that we could use to introduce this client as a sort of new contender in the market and to include them in the aggregator list. And then there are things like listicles, newsjacking, and potentially using a platform like Harrow, which stands for Help a Reporter Out, which essentially is a tool used by many brands to try and get links in kind of big, high-tier news publications, where essentially journalists have a request relating to a particular subject or market, and if you're an expert or you have knowledge in that market, you can answer that request, and more often than not, you can ask for a link to be included within the piece of coverage. And that brings us into our third and final poll. So from a link building perspective for your campaigns, do you have a clearly defined link acquisition strategy at the moment? Yes, no, or you're working on it?
There you go. I'm going to keep this one very quick in the interest of time, because we've still got a fair amount to cover, and I'm very keen for you to be able to get to the results that you've achieved. So I'll end the poll now and just share the results. So the majority don't have a link building or acquisition strategy in place, and still the remainder of people are working on it. But thank you all for taking part in those polls. It's been really interesting to find out. Thank you.
I should crack on in the interest of time. So the final element of the strategy was technical, and as I kind of alluded to earlier, this doesn't really need to play a huge part. I think from a technical perspective, in my own personal opinion, as long as you've got the minimum, the kind of minimal crucial elements there, the site is able to be crawled and indexed, you've got a good enough page load speed, the design and the kind of UX is engaging enough, and you've really got a solid structure and navigation, that's more than enough to get going with. There are some things that we didn't have, as I've listed to the right here, things like structured data or schematic markup, best-in-class page speed, sort of perfect image optimization, author bios, and the sort of table of contents, so things that are really nice to have and do have an impact on SEO, but it'd be quite an ask to try and have these from day one for a startup website. And then ultimately what we wanted to do is boil the strategy work down into sort of 3 strategic priorities. So what are the 3 things that we absolutely need to nail in order to hit these targets? And those were, number 1, complete coverage of the core content topics, the pillars and the clusters, targeting users at each stage of the funnel. It wouldn't be enough for us just to target those bottom of the funnel users. It's an incredibly competitive space. We had to have a kind of end-to-end approach for the content topic, both in terms of sort of keyword difficulty, but also to cover as much of that topic in a smaller amount of time as possible to try and close that gap on the competitors who've been in the space for years. The second strategic priority was a front-ended link acquisition strategy focused on brand links and closing the gap versus competitors for key landing pages We were never going to build more links from them in 6 months or even 12 months. But where we could overtake them or at least get close to them was the number and the quality of links going to our core landing pages. And that's one of the main areas where we had success. And finally, the third strategic priority was detailed insights across visibility, traffic engagement, and conversion that we could feed back into the strategy. When you're starting with a new website, with a new brand, you kind of going in blind. You need those insights and they need to be constant. So a fair amount of our budget was spent on that. So whenever a lead would come in, we go through the information. Who are these people? What's the demographic? Where do they live? What's their salary, et cetera, et cetera. And it really helped to inform the overall strategy as we went on. Without that, I don't think we would have achieved the results that we achieved. Really quick view of implementation. So essentially what we did and when we did it. So you can see nothing kind of out of the ordinary here. In month 1, we had the discovery and strategy. From month 2 onwards, we started to produce content and links. And then from month 5 onwards, once the site was starting to get a bit established, we started to do on-page optimization. So for the pages that have been live for the last couple of months, having a bit of a review in terms of how they're performing and making improvements to them. The one thing with the implementation that is different on this campaign than it is for most of our campaigns, and I imagine for most campaigns that have been done in-house, is the kind of velocity and the budget allocation. So you can see here we front-ended the content. We did much more content early on, and that kind of tailed off over time. Same with the links. We want to put much more of the link budget in early on, with the kind of logical thought process being that content takes time to rank, links take time to have impact. So let's do as much early on as we can and get that impact, get those performance gains as quickly as possible. Now, this can be a bit of a sticking point for some clients or some in-house teams. Most teams have a fixed marketing budget across the year, and for whatever reason, they like to split it out nice and evenly across each month. And although that works, generally speaking, the results will be slower for obvious reasons. So I think this was one of the key reasons why we were able to see the results as quickly as we did. And speaking of the results, so a quick snapshot of organic visibility. So what this chart shows here is the number of keywords ranked in each month and how many keywords were ranked in each position. So by the time we reached month 6, we had 17 keywords in the top 3 positions, which included the head term. We had 42 keywords in positions 4 to 10, 71 on page 2, etc., etc. And you can see the kind of continual growth over time. I think from month 2 onwards, that's when we started to get some keywords in the top 3, but it was around month 5, around month 4 or 5, where we started to get that top keyword in those top 3 positions. Sorry, just in terms of that head term, what I've shown here is the graph over the last 6 months in terms of where that keyword ranked. And again, you can see it started to get into those top 3 positions around sort of June, July time. And it's been there fairly consistently at the moment. I think we're ranking we're sort of bouncing between position 1 and 2 at the moment over the last week or so. And then just in terms of traffic, so again, sort of months 3 to sort of 4 were generally quite flat, but then from month 5 onwards, that's when we really seemed to get that sort of boost in traffic. It was around the same time that we started to rank for the main keyword in the top 3 positions. And what I've just layered over this is the traffic value. So if we were to pay for this traffic using PPC, how much would it have cost us? And by month 6, you're looking at around £70,000. Now, this data is taken from SEMrush. I take it with a pinch of salt. It's probably not that much, but it's certainly sort of over £50,000 a month. So there's real value in this traffic that we've been generating. It's not just blog traffic, informational traffic that's never going to turn into a conversion. It's absolutely commercial traffic. Key learnings, really quickly, again, conscious of time. So ultimately, I think there were 3 main areas which, kind of in addition to the solid strategy that we had, there were 3 key areas which really sort of played a pivotal role. The first was that end-to-end coverage of the core content topic area. So this is something that many competitors hadn't done themselves. So essentially, any keyword which included the term, let's say, car leasing, removing any small obvious ones that we didn't want to target, we covered all of that in a short space of time, and that really pushed us forward. The next one, as I mentioned, was the budget allocation and the velocity of activity, doing much more upfront and having a tailor off over time. And the third one was, alongside the SEO campaign, we had a paid campaign running on PPC and social, and this really helped to drive brand awareness early on. And what that results in is more people searching for your brand and perhaps more importantly, more people searching for your brand plus the non-brand keyword, which absolutely helps. I'm not going to go through the additional ones. You can see them on the screen. They're smaller points, but I'm conscious of time and I can see David looking through me. Q&A.
Shane, thank you so much. I'm impressed you managed to land that with 1 minute to spare. So halfway through, I was thinking we're never going to make it, but that was really informative. Thank you so much. We do have some time for some Q&A if anyone's got any questions. I know a few have been asked already. Whilst I'm waiting for you to type in any more questions that you may have, what I'm going to do is just going to paste into the chat a link to our next webinar, which is on the 12th of September. And that one's going to be about exploring how B2B firms can leverage meta ads for B2B lead generation. So just very quickly onto the questions. Shane and Jamie very kindly able to stick around for an additional 5 minutes or so. The first question that came through, I'll direct this at you, Shane, actually, is who set the organic sessions and conversions target? Was it from the client, or did you consult them about what was going to be achievable?
So it was set based on their commercial targets, so essentially how much revenue they wanted to generate, and then we worked back from that point. So if you want to generate this much revenue, it's going to be this many sales. You're going to generate this many sales, this many leads, traffic, pages, rankings, conversion. So it was the client who came with the broad goal, and then we kind of worked with them to essentially say, here's what needs to happen to hit that goal.
Great stuff. Thank you. Another question is there an easy way to see competitor PPC ads? And if not, how best to analyze competitor advertising?
So there's a couple of tools that I use, but they are paid tools and they are rather expensive. I believe there is a free tool, but for the life of me, I can't think of it off the top of my head. So if you can get the contact details of whoever asked that, David, I will certainly look into it and send it over.
I've got them here. Thank you.
Fairly certain there's a free tool.
Thank you. And just on that topic, do you want to just talk, maybe if you would start, Jamie, any influence that you're aware of paid activity on SEO?
Yeah, so I suppose a lot of people often conjoin the two together as one single strategy, but there actually is, although they are separate strategies, there is a lot of kind of overlap in how one can indirectly influence the other one. So for example, paid advertising, whenever you're using Google Ads, most likely, it can impact the likes of keyword research, because basically paid ads can essentially help identify like valuable keywords that you can then target in your SEO efforts. So like the paid ads themselves are doing some of your keyword research. For example, another way it might indirectly impact is in traffic and engagement, because obviously your paid ad campaigns are driving traffic directly to your site. This is increasing your engagement, your brand recognition, your influence as a product. Like this will indirectly benefit your SEO because you are getting that traffic through, you're getting those keywords acknowledged. I suppose Google doesn't necessarily know where your traffic is coming from, or well, you can track a lot of it, but it doesn't distinguish between what's working, or distinguish between what's working. It doesn't distinguish whether it's through paid or whatever. So once you come through, it does directly benefit. I suppose another way to think about it is it's going back to the keyword research fact that you can use it as testing. So like you can use paid ad campaigns to see which different keywords and strategies are working with the budget you have for, it's almost like killing two birds with one stone with your paid ads budget. You can use this testing for SEO efforts as well, and use the keywords that you would use in SEO. If they work with paid ads, it's likely they will also work in your long-term SEO efforts. And speaking of budget, I suppose like investing in paid advertising, it does sometimes, if it works out, it can free up a bit of budget that then can be put towards long-term SEO initiatives. So SEO is obviously a longer game. A lot of advertising and paid ads can be quick wins, quickly trying to achieve audience. Whereas if you do get that audience in, you're then using the information you gathered from that to then use that data for long-term SEO initiatives. So there is, whilst they're not directly related, they do have a lot of indirect influence on one another.
Great, thank you. Shane, I'll bring you in for this one. It's a question about how to avoid the Google sandbox if you do have a new site.
So it's, as I kind of said throughout, it's not something that often happens. I think the reason why it happened with our site is because we put so much of a focus on the paid side of things early on. So it's certainly one of the reasons. So if a new website launches, chances are people aren't going to be searching for that website over those 6 months. However, if you're running a paid brand campaign and getting your brand out there, then a result of that is people will be searching for your brand, which is obviously a quality signal for Google. But as I said earlier, more importantly, people will be searching for your brand plus your non-brand keyword, which is a really, really strong signal that your site should be ranking prominently for that term if it's happening in enough volume, essentially. So I think that's one of the main reasons we were able to do it. Obviously, you need to have a sort of solid website and a solid content plan in place, because if you're driving people to the site and they're not enjoying it, they're clicking back straight away. That's a massive red flag to Google, and you're probably not going to get out of the sandbox even after 6 months.
Right. Thank you very much. Look, that's all the questions we've had come through. So thank you, Shane, and thank you, Jamie, for your insights as well. We'll send around a recording of the webinar and a link to the slide deck later on, hopefully today. If not, it will be tomorrow. If you do think of any other questions in the meantime, please do drop us a line and we'll be happy to help. Look, thanks everyone for attending, and really do hope to see you at our next webinar in September.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.